Welcome back to KC Grid Talk, powered by shopakr.com Acceleration Kart Racing. I'm Emory Lyda. I'm joined once again by Alexander Searle. Alex, it's been a couple weeks. We've had little bit of time off on our end, but Rotax still in play. We've got SKUSA Winter Series coming up next. How are you feeling, man?
I'm excited.
Man, a few words.
we got
Right.
we got Kimi
So
Räikkönen
the
out here.
dorm, the dorm Wi-Fi decided to shut off at the best time possible there. I don't know what you guys heard, so I'm just gonna re-say it. Great action the past couple of weeks at Rotax up in Orlando. I'm expecting more of the same for the SKUSA guys down in Homestead this coming week. I mean, they put on a good show for us a month ago, and I expect more of the same here in a few days' time.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a really good show, both at the first couple rounds of the Winter Series as well as with the Rotax Winter Trophy that we saw these last 2 weekends in Orlando. And David Land, coming back to you. I mean, again, a couple weekends off. You're set to go back to Miami. I mean, how are we feeling headed into this weekend?
I'm excited. It looks like it's going to be a little bit drier than it was the last time we were in Miami. Fingers crossed, of course, knock on wood and all that. But yeah, we're going backwards this time, which of course I hope will turn things up on its head. I mean, we were pretty good about talking about the storylines going into the last time they ran a SKUSA Winter Series race, and we got a lot of them nailed down before it even happened. So I'm kind of excited to see us talk through looking forward to this weekend and seeing if we can be quite as accurate as we were last time, because I think we were pretty good.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we nailed a few things. We got Alessandro Tullio winning the race, courtesy of Alex. And then, David, on your side of things, you picked Ryan Norberg to end the winless drought. And that obviously happened right away in round number 1. So, off to a good start there. But I want to start tonight's show by talking about another guy who ended a drought a couple weeks ago at the Rotax Winter Trophy Series. That would be none other than Diego Ramos, who, I mean, let's face it, first off, the start of 2024 was pretty rocky for Diego in Miami. I mean, we talked about him last episode with incident that he had involving Dalton Haynes and Brendan Carr, and in terms of pace wasn't quite there. But I mean, this past 2 weekends in Orlando, sensational stuff from Diego. He gets his first pro national win in almost 2 years, dating back to February of 2022 at the Winter Series, and ultimately after some penalties and a little bit of a more rough showing on Sunday in the second round of the Winter Trophy, was able to come away with a national championship and a trip overseas heading into the Rotax finals. So, I mean, Alex, we've covered Diego at this point for a while now. I mean, we've seen kind of the highs and the lows, the consistency showed and on board the Burrell art for PSL last year. But I mean, what do you think this win a couple weekends ago meant to Diego just to finally get that monkey off his back?
I mean, he like a lot of drivers that we've spoke about who have been on a dry streak, right? He's heard the noise 100%. And I'm sure for a guy like him who is used to winning and hasn't had that in about 2 years, right? It was a relief. I mean, you saw the celebrations after he won, how much it meant to him. I mean, up on the seat, if we could hear him talking, we probably could have heard him yelling with how happy he was. So I think it's gonna do a lot for his confidence. Because we mentioned it in the last episode, right? He had a pretty slow second half of last year, and it didn't look so great in the first few rounds of the Winter Series, right? We spoke about him regarding a bit of swerving. But he went to Orlando last week, and I mean, he was quick. He was quick. I don't want to say dominant, right? Because it was a really, really close field, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But in that final, he got the gap when he needed to, and I mean, he was able to get that win, and it's going to do a lot for not only himself but for Burrell as well, to show that Kart still can perform at a high level, and hopefully he can take that momentum on to this weekend.
Yeah, and for Diego, I mean, to be able to kind of put things together in not just a one-round situation. I mean, we've seen him be up at the front really all the way from his debut on aboard the PSL machine back in Road America in 2022. But for him to finally kind of get that last little bit and really show that race winning pace and then be able to put it across 3 different rounds, the resilience to put himself back into the top 10 and give himself a chance at the ticket to the grand finals. Like, for me, that was really impressive. And I think, I mean, like you mentioned, Alex, just being able to show that yes, like they've had their struggles the last year or so with consistency, but when they get that chassis right, there's not many karts out there quicker. And so, I mean, it's good for Diego. I think it's a big win for PSL. And I mean, let's face it, the pressure on Diego as well, kind of with Mateus going over to a shifter program, Marian not on the team anymore. You really haven't seen anyone else step up on the single speed side of things for them. So, I mean, it's a big deal, David, to kind of have Diego kind of get that opening win of the season and at least kind of establish some kind of rhythm for PSL on the single speed side of things.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, ever since I started Kart Chaser, which was about 2 years ago, Diego Ramos has always been one of the drivers that we focused on, and we've been, covering and we'll chase him down for interviews. And, it's kind of interesting to me as an outsider is that oftentimes, more often than not, really in the races that I've covered him, he's been mid pack and then sometimes kind of hanging on to the end of the front pack, but not often do I see him competing for wins. And so I guess the question that I had for you guys, because I mean, the industry definitely seems to be high on Diego Ramos, but what do you guys think brought on this change with Diego getting back into the winner's circle after such a long time?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things for Diego, we saw last year the progression of him kind of finishing anywhere from 3rd to 6th at a lot of different races. I mean, the consistency for him to get in the top 5 is what enabled him to have a chance at the USPKS Championship. And I mean, I was kind of adamant about this with both Norberg and DeTulio in rounds 1 and 2 at Homestead, that when you're consistently up at the front of the field, like at some point it's gonna kind of swing into your favor. And I don't think Diego maybe had that quite as much as those two did, in the sense that he didn't show race winning pace a ton last year, but he still showed it often enough to where at some point he was going to have that kind of last little bit. And I think that he comes to a race in Orlando where kind of a lot of different cards fell his way. I think he had the first official round of the championship. We saw kind of guys like Mossman and Garrison have their own individual struggles at different points. And we saw other guys like Ingrata kind of getting used to their new teams. And you add that with Diego at a track that he's really comfortable with in Orlando, at a track that obviously PSL and pretty much anyone on the grid knows really well. I mean, you're going to have a chance to put things together. And once you have that race winning pace, all you need is a couple different things to go your way. And we saw, I mean, the consistency on a race weekend has never really been the issue for Diego. It's all about just finding that last little bit of outright pace, as well as kind of stringing together good racecraft and being able to get himself to the front. And so, I mean, I think we saw that for him. I think that I wouldn't expect it to be like a week in, week out thing where he's winning every single race, certainly because with how competitive senior is. But on the pro level, for him to be able to get that first win of the year and really kind of show the pace last year, it might not have been all the way at the front, but he had the pace enough times to where this sort of performance wasn't really surprising. I mean, he was really fast in Houston. He was fast at Cincinnati. He was fast at Newcastle at various points, especially at USPKS. And I think there were enough different examples of Diego going fast to where, like, this race wasn't overly surprising, but it was something where it was nice to see him kind of finally put that full weekend together and put himself in the best possible spot to walk away on Sunday.
Yeah, Emory, I think you highlighted it perfectly there, right? It was never really a question of his speed. There were weekends where we'd come out of it and say, we kind of get back and say, what happened to Ramos this weekend, right? He'd be outside the top 10, 15, even 20 sometimes. And it happened more often last year than we've ever seen it to him. But it was never a question of his speed. We knew he was quick, right? There was just a little bit of there was other things going on that were causing that, right? And so I think the cards fell his way last week, and he's able to get the win pretty handily too. So I think the big question that's gonna still, that question that rises out of this is, can he do it? Can he sustain this, success for the year, right? Because he was able to do it a few years back. He was quick with REM. Can he do it consistently and sustain that for the year, right? Like you mentioned, Emory, he was quick. Houston, Newcastle, and a few other tracks last year. But then there were certain tracks where he was, 20th. So it's going to be interesting to see if now with the monkey off his back, the confidence levels are higher than they've been in a while for him. Hopefully, and I think it will start to turn around in his favor as the year goes on.
2024 has kind of already been a year of breaking winless streaks, right? I mean, Ryan Norberg and Diego Ramos, you guys are both drivers. How important is it? I mean, can you even put it into words how important it is to break a winless streak? And how important is that confidence when you go back to the racetrack the next time after a big win?
Man, it's so huge. Like, I mean, Alex, you can explain first, but it's huge.
It's so important. I mean, because most drivers, especially on the pro grid, right, shifter, senior, and even the junior guy, I'm not. And this is to every class, every form of racing, from karting to the highest levels of motorsport. Most of the times, you're in that sport because you enjoy it and you're probably pretty good at it. But there comes a point where you get to a year, 2 years, sometimes longer, right? We see it in the higher levels, like in F1, where some guys just are not on a good team and you can't win. And you have to self-assess and look back and say, did I get the best out of this weekend? And there comes a point where you start lose. I don't say losing, but you don't win for a certain period of time, and that self-assessment becomes, man, can I still do this at a high level? And then the results start to come back, and you say, okay, maybe I can, but you don't really have that result, that the proof, until you go out there and win again. And so for guys like, and I'm not saying this for Ryan, because Ryan had a bunch of P2s and maybe could have won some races last year, and Tulio was quick last year as well with consistencies. But for a guy like Diego, who hasn't won in 2 years and had some inconsistencies, this win is going to validate what we've all thought of him and what he's thought of himself as well, right? I mean, he's a very highly driver. So it's so important, and I can speak for karting. I can speak for any form of racing, any sports, right? You stop winning, and it becomes, you start losing confidence. And so to get that back, it adds to your quality of driving. You start to drive better. You start to drive with this mindset of I can do it, and you start to do things that maybe you wouldn't have done before, and you start to drive better. More consistent. Your mental clarity is there. It's so important. I mean, Emory, I know you can speak on this as well. For me, at least, it is one of the most important and underrated things in racing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on a much smaller scale, I had a very similar thing to Diego happen last year, where it had been 2 years since I had won a race, and I'd gotten a number of podiums. I think it was 11 at that point since my last win. And I mean, Diego had kind of a similar result, where it was like he was on the podium every other weekend but couldn't quite finish the deal. And once you do that, it's like, okay, now I've won the race. Now it's like, okay, I know I can win these. You start to lose a little bit of faith in yourself when you go through these dry spells. I mean, Alex, you put it perfectly. It's not just karting. It's pro sports in general. It's sports. It's life in general. Like, when you're not able to come out on top, you start losing kind of that self-confidence to some degree. And I mean, it's a credit to Diego and a credit to Norberg and Tulio as well, that they never once lost full faith in their abilities. So, I mean, for me, it was kind of enabled me to start clicking off results from there, and just kind of knowing that every weekend, okay, I know my potential. I know I can win in these fields. And in Diego's case, he knows now that he can go to Homestead this upcoming weekend and be right up there again and pull it off again. And I mean, I'm sure he had that confidence before, but to just reaffirm that and kind of get that result that he needed to kind of prove it, I think has a lot to do with it as well. And also, it can't be overstated, it's his first win for PSL. And he came in 2022 at Road America, and at the time you have Marian, who was in the midst of a dominant shifter run in 2022 and was up at the front of the single speed side of things as well. You have Mateus Morgado, who dominated the rock side of things last year and also had a few good wins, or a few good results as well, in the X30 side of things last year. And so for Ramos as well, I mean, I don't want to speak too much into his mind, but there could be a little bit of hey, I need to kind of hold up my end of the bargain a little bit here in terms of just kind of getting that last good result, that kind of statement win. And so for him to do that, I think it's a statement drive from him, puts himself firmly on the map as a contender heading into this year. He ends up with the Rotax Finals ticket as well. So that's good to see from Diego. But one other guy I want to talk about, David, before we kind of head into some more storylines from the Rotax weekend and get into the SKUSA previews, is Austin Garrison, because he came away the first race of this past weekend with a win ahead of his teammate Frankie Mossman, a duel, honestly, throughout that 16-lap final in Orlando. We saw him racing against Mossman. We saw Harley Keeble up there. We saw Emma Scarboro, who I want to talk about a little bit later on. But I mean, for Garrison, this time last year, picked up his first win in a while in the National Pro scene himself at Homestead in this very exact round that we're coming to this upcoming weekend. But I mean, we've talked about Garrison a lot. He's into his first kind of his first full-time national season that we've seen from him in a long while. He's off to a good start so far. To get that win on Saturday, what do you think Garrison will take away from that heading into kind of the more normal pro schedule through the rest of the season, David?
Well, for me, Austin Garrison's one of the most impressive drivers right now in that category, because every time he shows up, he's a factor. I don't think I've covered a race that Austin Garrison is in that he's not in that front pack at some point or at the top of the time charts at some point throughout that weekend. So for him to get off to a good start in 2024, not surprising, but also something I think the competitors need to take a long, hard look at. It sure seems like there's a lot of guys coming into this Homestead race with a lot of momentum coming out of Orlando. And something I guess we can kind of tie into Garrison and Ramos for that matter is something that I'm a bit curious about, because, you know, while I haven't obviously raced at either of these tracks, I've at least had opportunities to drive around Orlando and Homestead, and they're very, very different tracks in terms of their layout and philosophy and flow. Is there much you can take away from doing well at Orlando that you can apply to Homestead?
I mean, I think that at the end of the day, there's similar profiles of corners, especially on the reverse layout that we're going to see in rounds 3 and 4. I mean, you see kind of a more technical side, and we're going to talk about this more in depth later in the preview when we get into kind of the exact sort of track conditions for Homestead compared to what you would say from Orlando. When it comes to like the technicality of it, there's certainly a couple different corners. And Alex, I mean, you would know this a lot more than I would in terms of exactly what Homestead is like, because I mean, if there's one guy on this whole entire kart chaser team that knows Homestead, I mean, Xander's got a pretty good beat on it, but besides him, I think you're probably second in command. But I mean, I would say like there's definitely similarities. Like you can take some of the corner profiling. Orlando is a much different track in the way that it races, in the sense that there's a lot more hairpin opportunities, and certainly you're going to see more kind of like, I would say, bull ring type racing, which is ironic with how long it is. But I mean, at the end of the day, a kart track's a kart track. They both have tight corners. They both have a couple of different longer corners. And I think that when you get to the pro level, when you get to these levels of drivers, you're not really talking about track to track variance as much, other than like a real big difference, like going from Newcastle to Dowsman, for example. But between Homestead and Orlando, me personally, I don't think there's enough of a difference for it to take away from the confidence or the lessons learned from one weekend. But Alex, I mean, I think you're probably a little bit better suited to answer that, at least on the Homestead side of things.
Yeah, I mean, you said it really well there, Emory. Whereas it's if you're quick in one, you're gonna probably be quick at most places. And Orlando and Homestead don't have that much of a disparity, right? I mean, if anything, with the amount of curbs you got to take at Orlando, with the reverse layout at Homestead, with a little bit more curbage being used, especially in that 5 and 6 complex, or what would be 5 and 6 on the normal layout, you're gonna see a few more curbs being used, I'd say, this way around at Homestead. And I'd say it opens up some technical passing points. I mean, the biggest thing that stands out to me from Orlando to Homestead is the almost, I don't call it tic-tac-toe section, but the 3 curbs you have to jump before the final corner at Orlando is very similar to what we'd see exiting the carousel through the quick right and left hairpin. And actually, that passing zone that you'd get after hitting the curb is identical to the Orlando passing zone. So I think that is one of those things where you're going to see some drivers take away from Orlando to Homestead. But other than that, I mean, the Orlando track flows more, right? The corners are more rounded off. At Homestead, we have a bit more, fast 90-degree corners carry the speed through, whereas Homestead, it's a lot of carrying the speed, but a lot of, slow and fast out corners. So nonetheless, I mean, I don't think it's going to be one of those where, one guy's quick here, not quick here. It usually translates pretty well. But we'll see. I mean, obviously with the Rotax stuff, right? It's a different package completely to the IME stuff. So that's going to play a factor into it as well. Well, other than that, I mean, before let's go back to you, Emory. I want to bring up, because you mentioned Austin Garrison. I want to speak on the Davie native there as well, because he is super fun to watch, because he's not one of those guys where you look at him and say, wow, he is exciting to watch, like maybe like a Harley Keeble, right? Who's going to go out there and elbows out everybody. But under the radar, Garrison is an elbows out guy, aggressive, but he is fast. I mean, he's rocket fast. And he got a major win last year at Homestead. But I want this kind of ties into the confidence thing we talked about earlier in this episode, right? Where last year he was every single weekend driving for a ride, right? I mean, he was in and out of the seat all year long. So to come into this year knowing he has a ride secured for pretty much all of the events this year, right? So he's already done SKUSA, now he's done Road Tax. He's locked in with the Speed Concepts guys. Does a lot for your confidence, right? And so while I'm not going to say he's driving better than he ever has, he's driving confident and he's driving smart and well. And it showed there in the Road Tax race that he won. I mean, it was a clinical Garrison win, right? We saw Mossman and Keeble, two youngsters going at it, and Garrison got the better of both of them, right? So it was a classic Garrison win, kind of outsmarted them a little bit in the closing stages of that race. And he's probably one of the guys to look out for. We'll get into that a little bit later for this weekend. But he's been impressive in the first few rounds of this year in the karting scene. And yeah, I look for him to make headway as the season gets on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Garrison, like you mentioned, driving, I wouldn't say maybe the best of his career, because I mean, he's had a lot of accomplishments over the course of his career, whether it be the early days with OGP, whether it be with Fullerton, with Kart as well for a spell. I mean, he's had a lot of success, and most recently with Speed Concepts. But for him to just have that composed, like you mentioned, like a clinical classic Garrison drive, like it just speaks volumes to, I mean, not just the speed, because the speed, I feel like there's a lot of guys out there that have the pace to run all the way at the front on the national level. But for him to consistently not make mistakes on a racecraft side, like he might not win every battle. And I think that you could say the same thing for everyone, but he very rarely makes big mistakes that throws him out of contention. And when you're looking at guys that are going to contend for national championships, that are going to contend to win USPKS, to win Pro Tour for the full season, that's the sort of kind of mistake-free racing that you need. And I mean, we've seen guys that string together consistent results, but they make mistakes in racecraft. And I think Garrison, he can be elbows out, but I think more than anything, it's a calculated elbows out. And that is, to me, really impressive. To get the win against Mossman, Keeble, Scarboro, Angrada, and the rest of the field on this past Saturday was really impressive. But after the break and a word from our partners, I want to talk some more about Frankie Mossman, his Speed Concepts Racing teammate, who came one pushback bumper penalty away from a spot in the Rotax finals. We're going to talk about it and the pushback discussion next. But first, hear from our partners.
I'll start this one again. So a little technical difficulty there. So while we wait for a word there on our producer there on to get those commercials rolling, Emory, we talked about it a little bit before the show, right? One driver we need to talk about here before we get into the Mossman debate. We got to talk about Emma Scarboro, right? Because she was so impressive, especially this past weekend. I mean, to be right up there with some of the top competitors in all the senior class, spoke volumes to the level of a driver that she is, right? I mean, to move up to the senior ranks and to be that quick out the gate. I mean, a P4 there on Saturday this past week. And I mean, right there within the mix. I mean, within a second of getting that victory. I mean, what stood out to you from her driving there?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is she didn't look out of place at all in the front of the field battle. Like, she was composed. She was able to pick her way ahead of Harley Keeble for a brief moment there in the closing stages. I think she probably should have defended knowing Harley, but at the end of the day, I mean, those are kind of the trial by fire situations that you're going to put yourself into. And from a sheer pace perspective, being able to be in the mix with guys like Keeble, guys like Garrison, guys like Mossman is super impressive. And I mean, we've seen it from her at different points on the junior side of things. We saw last year in Orlando, she was able to put it on the front row and be ultra consistent with Stephen Miller as her teammate early on in the season. We saw, as well as that, I mean, different points during the winter series, or both SKUSA Winter Series as well as Florida Winter Tour last season. And then a couple of different points during the course of the regular season as well. She was able to kind of put herself into the top 10, into the consistent mix on the junior side. But having said that, I think it was kind of a shock from a pace standpoint because, I mean, she kind of flown under the radar over the second half of the season. And I mean, to be completely honest with you, after what we'd seen at the end of the weekend, I don't think anyone would have really penciled her in as one of the front runners. But to be up there, and not only up there, but to be composed, not make the mistake. She didn't come away with the win. Sunday was a little bit more rough. She got caught up in a little bit of incidents, ended up, I believe, in 13th on the track provisionally after running well inside the top 20 throughout the entire weekend. Like, Saturday was a mega superstar type show. Like, one of the most impressive senior, not debuts because she's run a couple of the previous winter races, but one of her first senior races to be all the way up at the front of the field, racing against those guys, not making critical mistakes. Like, it was super impressive. I think it's something that she can build off of. And I mean, I have to say, like, for me, Emma Scarboro was the standout driver of the weekend, Alex.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the drivers up front that we can, and really the past couple of weeks, are drivers that are notable guys in the senior class that have made their mark, put their stamp on the class. You know, you like you said, pencil them in. They're going to be up at the front. Emma, who is very, very quick in the junior ranks, usually it takes. We're seeing it less and less now because how similar junior and senior classes are in terms of the transition. It's not that different of a driving style at all. But you know, she's done a few senior races, right? And she was quick, but going into Saturday, I don't think any of us expected, you know, the level of performance that we saw from her. And that was something that for me stood out, right? I mean, to be up there with Garrison, Mossman, Keeble, I mean, to be ahead of guys like Ramos, who just won the whole thing, right? It says a lot about how quick she is. And I suspect this is going to, again, I think the theme of this podcast, we're going to call it confidence because it plays into the confidence of her drive.
Alex's college dorm Wi-Fi is definitely not confident, but no, I mean, I completely agree with Alex's point there. Like, Emma's ability to kind of run all the way at the front of the field, if nothing else, get good experience and laps running in that kind of situation. Like, it was ultra impressive. I know there's something to do with kind of a home track sort of feel with her familiarity with Orlando, but at the same time, you got to realize Ryan Norberg, home track of Orlando, has a million laps, it feels like, around that place. Austin Garrison, home track there as well. A number of the 50-plus entries at Rotax were home field drivers. And I think in some ways, like, for her to rise above the occasion in that situation was really impressive. And I mean, I think it's it's a great building block for her. I think now the question is how many of those races can she stack together? Can she do it on the X30 platform? Because Rotax does have slight differences in the power delivery. And normally when it's a guy like Garrison or Norberg or Ramos, you don't really look at that sort of difference quite as much. But when it's a rookie in the senior ranks, when you don't have quite as much experience going cross-engine platform, you do wonder how that will carry over. But David, I mean, we're going to shift gears here, focus on fast Frankie Mossman, because we've seen him up at the front of the field, but for him to put together a breakthrough weekends, almost, I say almost, get a ticket to the World Finals. I mean, first off, before we get into the pushback bumper side of things, I mean, what sort of display did you think this was from Mossman?
Well, it's huge. Anytime you can run up front and prove that you belong up there, especially under pressure and against, like Alex was talking about, against the best. I'll just say it, the best in the world. Why not? Against the best in the world, you've really shown something. And I think that's something that's been so great about these car chaser events or events that are broadcast by us. Again, I'll toot the horn, I'll beat the drum. You get such a high level of competition when someone steps up. Hey, they're broadcasted to the world. So I think it's great, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where things go.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Frankie Mossman, I mean, first off, for Frankie, it's heartbreaking. He was completely able to put himself in P1, got the win on Sunday on track, got P2 on Saturday. Looked like after that race had clinched the Rotax Grand Final ticket. Unfortunately, pushback bumper penalty. From everything that we've heard, we don't know exactly when the pushback occurred, but from everything that he has said and from what we've heard, it sounds like it was off of a white lining incident. So, I mean, first off, for Frankie, I have to say this was one of the most impressive drives we've seen from him as senior, because Frankie Mossman, I mean, one of the most talented kids in the karting paddock. We've seen him run cars. We've seen on the karting side of things, him be in the top 5, be a contender. But in all seriousness, he really doesn't have a signature moment in karts until you get to this point, at least on the Pro X30 side of things, or the Pro X30, Pro Rotax, like the 125cc single speed side of things. And for Mossman, this was that moment, that one like clinching moment, getting a grand finals ticket, putting himself in that perfect situation, and it gets taken away from a pushback penalty. I mean, Alex, this isn't the first time we've had disappointing pushback penalties. We've seen it multiple times at Supernats with it taking away a national win, kind of the pinnacle of U.S. karting. But for that to happen to someone like Mossman, I mean, what was your reaction to not only seeing that, but also hearing that news?
I mean, heartbreak, right? Like you mentioned, this is probably the best we've seen Frankie drive in a kart in the senior class, in quite some time at least. He did everything right, and it gets taken away because of a post race penalty, and it's in the rules. But I think that's probably a great segue into what we're going to talk about here, the pushback bumpers. It's tough, right? It's such a gray area on whether or not they are good or bad for the sport. And I know everyone has their differing opinions on these, because they were brought in to clean up the starts and to allow for cleaner racing. And I don't know if necessarily it's done that. And quite often, I see it, resulting in people losing a win or a second, or losing a podium, right? Or losing a top 5, losing a championship like we saw this past weekend, losing a ticket to the grand finals. So and that being said, like if you go out there and dump somebody and you got a pushback, like, yeah, it's a penalty. But a lot of the times it happens at the start, right? And then there's certain times where it's reviewable, certain times certain series have a rule where it's you can't protest it. And that's if it's in the rule book, that's not my issue. My issue is if they should be a thing or not, right? Have they actually done what they're supposed to do for the sport? And in my opinion, and I know there's a lot of people probably have the same sort of viewpoint as me, right? Where to me, with the technology that we have in this day and age, if the whole point of pushback bumper is to clean up the starts, let's get some cameras, let's get everything we can to make sure we can see everybody's bumper. And if you dump somebody, it's a penalty, right? Because for a lot of drop downs, I've seen drop downs happen with lap carts, right? I've seen drop downs happen with a brake check, and it's unprotestable. And then there's certain times, right, where you have some series allow it where you can protest it, and that's great. And then everyone starts to take advantage of that, and you start to, you protest it and it gets overturned. Then what was the point of the pushback bumper if everyone can kind of, I don't say cheat the system, but I mean, if you run in the back of somebody at the start and say somebody hit you and the bumper drops down, well, if that gets overturned, then you pretty much now are a batting ram for the next 20 laps because your bumper drops down, and that's it. So and Emory, I'm curious to see your perspective on this, right? Because I was around for both, but I think you were probably a little bit more of an OG with the non-drop downs. So I really want to get your opinion on this because for me, I think a lot of the drivers would probably echo what I'm trying to say in terms of, are pushback bumpers better for the sport, or should I say, are they doing what they were intended to do?
I mean, to be completely honest with you, in the first few months of pushback bumper racing, the idea was you clean up the starts and you clean up some of the mid to back of the field drama that you realistically can't enforce on the race directing side of things. And what we've seen since then is the starts really don't get that much cleaner. You just have arbitrary penalties that happen as a result of middle to rear of the field stack ups. And what it's also done is it's created a culture in which you can block all race without any sort of repercussions of someone moving you, because if they move you, there's a chance they get a pushback penalty. And if you're racing competitively for national wins, which is where pushbacks are the most prevalent, then naturally you're not going to want to risk that for just booting someone out of the way when you feel like you can pass them. So I think that pushback bumper, it's a good idea in theory. I think if it was with context, there's benefits to it. But I took a look at some of the numbers before this podcast because I really wanted to get a good gauge on exactly what the pushbacks was like. And so I went back to a race at a track that I know very well in Trackhouse Motorplex, a place that doesn't really condone itself to a whole lot of like bull ring style racing where you use your bumper a ton to make passes where it's like necessary to push people out of the way. And the last national race that we ran there across the two senior categories that have pushback, so K Senior and X30 Pro, over the course of the weekend, there was a total of 74 pushback bumper penalties. 74. Of those, almost over a quarter of them got overturned. 20 of them got overturned. And I would imagine a lot of the reason that some of them don't get overturned is because people don't realize how easy it is to overturn them. And I know I might catch a little bit of flack for this, but realistically, if you go to overturn a pushback penalty, all you have to prove is that it was realistically out of your control. And some series have different tolerances for that. I'm not going to get into that as a slippery slope, and I don't want to critique or discuss race directing. But at the end of the day, when you have a penalty that's so common that almost every driver gets it, because over the course of the weekend, there are, I believe, 96 total senior drivers across the two categories. So you're talking about almost 80%. You're averaging 0.8 penalties per driver pretty much over the course of the weekend. And from personal experience, almost all of the pushbacks I've ever gotten have been either on the start or from someone wrecking right in front of me, right? And it sucks. It really sucks because the pushback should be designed to take away the overly aggressive driving at the start, but the penalties you get from the start aren't from the guys causing the incidents. they're from the guys 3 or 4 rows back that pile into the incidents and realistically have nowhere to go. And you can say, oh, just lay off their bumper. But when you're racing in a field of 50 and you come into turn 1 and they're saying lay off, you can give a cart length, but if you give 3, you're going to get piled in from behind. And if you give 1, that's not going to do anything. So I think it's limited effectiveness on the starts. It doesn't take out the reckless driving we see in the middle of the field because, I mean, if I can go 5 to 6 years with only 1 pushback from a non-start or crash-related incident, like it's not from booting people. So I think it has limited effectiveness on what it actually does. And I mean, it was a good idea. It's certainly had its positives at times. And like, I don't mind the thought behind it, but at the end of the day, we need to find a different solution to make the starts a little bit cleaner. I think first off, there needs to be a discussion about reduced grid size because when you're having in the X30 and X30 Pro side of things, it's not as big of a deal when there's 30 to 40, but in KA, when there's 50 carts on the track at a time or 46, naturally you're going to have a quarter of the field get pushbacks, right? And the starts are going to be chaos no matter how it goes. So smaller field sizes, I like an idea where you give the potential to have one call review per weekend, kind of like how the NFL does challenges, where if you feel like you've been wronged on track, even if they didn't call the penalty, you have the jurisdiction to bring it to the race officials, but you only get 1 per weekend. And if you fail, if you don't get it right, then you don't get that back. And maybe you have some sort of monetary incentive to de-incentivize that. But I think that that sort of method of policing the midfield combined with more cameras on the start, it's not going to be a perfect fix. I think there needs to be a lot more discussion on that. But to me, the pushback system doesn't really do what it was designed to do in the first place. And we're getting to the point now where we've seen enough big instances. I look at Brandon Lemke having a pushback from the start at Supernats back in 2019 that took away one of the greatest drives you've ever seen. I look at Mossman this year having the winter trophy taken away over a pushback. And I look at similar incidents over the course of the last few years where maybe it wasn't as high profile, but it took away big wins in the support categories as well. And I mean, David, I just look at this like we need to find a way to enforce penalties without it being arbitrary and without it really being from incidents that have no real bearing on the race. And process-wise, wouldn't be called if it wasn't for an arbitrary rule.
Yeah, that's kind of the great mystery in all of racing is how do you make it as fair as possible? I mean, I think there's a couple of things that I take away from this discussion. The first one is that, were we not just talking on the last episode about rough driving? I feel like we had 3 or 4 examples of, very rough driving where we were questioning, whether or not it really should have been allowed or penalized or what have you. And I don't think a single one of those, if I can remember correctly, involved a pushback. Maybe one involving Ryan Norberg, but that was 1 out of 4 that we specifically talked about. And like you said, I mean, the statistic of 74 pushbacks in a weekend is unbelievable to me. And
74 in 2 classes, not every class. In 2 total, in 2 classes.
Well, so there you go. And I guess it would go back to the other point that you made as to why they don't give every team and every driver a challenge flag, because you would literally, I mean, because we know this with the protest system as it is. I think if I remember correctly, at least in SKUSA, you have to put up some money as kind of almost like a collateral in case you aren't right in your protest and you're wasting the officials' time. If you gave everyone a free one at the start of the weekend, that trailer from the first practice on would have a line out the door. I mean, it would be so. I just don't know. I don't know how you can put a system in place where it's fair, not only where the officials are able to make the right call, but then also to give them enough information to make that right call, I should say, but also to give the competitors enough leeway without, just totally having them overwhelming the officials with protests. it's a hell of a conundrum, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that I look at too that is an issue, and it kind of sucks to say it, but we do have a lack of staffing compared to what we're trying to accomplish on the race directing side. You can only wear so many hats, and realistically, on track, you're going to miss calls. It's just natural. When you're focusing on the front of the field, it's no different than us covering a race as a whole. There's naturally going to be some action at some point over the course of a 40 card field that we'll miss, and there will be some passes, some instances that the race directors, the corner workers will inherently miss over the course of a race weekend. It happens. And off the track, there's only so much brain space. Like, as it is, these guys are doing a really good job, in my opinion, of being efficient with the staffing that they have. But to be able to do an idea like me, you would need to kind of find a way, either reallocate roles or to find maybe another person on staff. And I mean, that's kind of the more logistical side where I would say like there would need to be more discussion in terms of trying to figure out a way to make that to your point, where it's not overwhelming the race officials to where they're not having to deal with people coming into the trailer from 6 a.m. on a Friday all the way through the end of the race on Sunday. And I think making it to where you only get one and no more is at least a start, but I don't think it would still be way too frequent. And Alex, I mean, I want to hear maybe if you have an idea that you think would be better, if you have an idea that you think could be kind of a long-term fix to the epidemic of rough starts and rough driving over the course of the middle of the field that we can't always catch.
It's impossible, right? I think the biggest solution is going to be smaller grids, because no amount of cameras, no amount of pushbacks, the call will always be wrong in somebody's eyes, right? We'll never know, because we'll never know intent. If somebody rams somebody, we'll never know, right? We never know if it's a brake check. We have somewhat of the data, but not really. So it's in somebody's eyes, the call will always be wrong. And that's just the way racing is. It's the way sports are. Smaller grid sizes can eliminate some of that, right? Because usually things happen because it bottlenecks in the middle of the grid, and then the back of the grid slams into the front of the grid, and we create, there's 10 pushbacks right there. It happened before turn one. And in a series where it's unprotestable, that's 10 guys that their race is ruined. In a series where it's protestable, now you have a line to the steward's office, right? So no matter what, there's an issue here. And while I agree with the one sort of penalty flag a weekend, it would have to be countered with, if you're right and it overturns, you should get it back. Because to me, like I've seen drivers get wronged 4 times in a weekend, and if you only get one chance at it, it's like, man, there goes your weekend, right? So you should be able to kind of overturn things if you feel like you've been wronged. I mean, 8 times, for example. But I think, because a lot of the times, like the I don't say the line, but after a major final in the senior shifter class, even the junior side of things, you tend to see a line, right, to the race director, because a lot of things happen in that race. A lot of those penalties, I'm almost sure, I don't have the actual stat, but just going off of what Emory said at Trackhouse, and that's one event with 2 classes, right? Most of those penalties, most of the line buildup is from a pushback or some form of pushback bumper. It's never really, well, I dumped the guy and I want to overturn it. Usually, if you dump somebody, you probably know you did it. You're not even going to try to overturn it. Or if it's a technical issue, whatever. Most of the time, you're trying to protest something that you really feel like you can overturn it. And like Emory said, for the guys that didn't overturn their bumper, it's probably either they didn't know they could, or didn't know how simple it really is, because a lot of times bumpers happen because you got hit from the back and you hit the guy in front of you, and there goes your bumper, there goes your race. Sometimes it happens because somebody got mad that they were white lining and dumped them, and that's part of the problem of the pushback. And again, there's good to the pushback, right? It did some of what it had to do, but I think the pushback also created new problems, right? And now one of the biggest problems it created, and you mentioned it earlier, Emory, is what we call it white lining, where a guy can get to the lead, and even if he's maybe a tenth or 2 off the pace, he knows in the back of his head he can't afford to get past because he's going to fall back. So he's going to, for the next 20 laps, widen the racetrack and force you to dump them, which no one's going to do because they don't want to get a drop down. And back, 10 years ago, whatever, if you white lined before 2 to go, if you didn't see the 2 sticks in the air and somebody started blocking, I mean, most likely you're getting sent, to a different dimension a lap later. And that was just kind of like an unwritten agreement. If don't block or don't you could defend, don't white line the whole racetrack, otherwise you're going to get shipped. And that was just one of those things people understood. Drop downs get introduced, and all of a sudden people realize this sort of loophole of, well, who's to say I can't do that now? Because if you dump me, your race is ruined and mine's ruined, and it's a double whammy because you're gonna get a penalty for shipping me and a drop down. So it's just one of those things where I think what the good that it solved doesn't outweigh some of the issues that have arisen from it. Not to say that they should be eliminated, right? Because pushbacks are a thing now, but I think there's better ways to possibly police the issue of pushbacks of starts, and it starts with smaller grids and somehow getting more eyes, more cameras, should I say, on that start. It's impossible. It's an impossible task because we're not gonna. If you have a grid of 36, you can't have 36 cameras out there on each bumper, but it's a start, and usually if you kind of look towards the mid pack, that's where things start, like I said, to bottleneck, and that's where the issues arise. So for me, I mean, I echo all the things you guys are saying, and I think we kind of all agree in what could be done to fix it, but there's no right or wrong. David, you said it best as well, right? It's how do we it's racing, right? How can we make things as fair as possible and make people as least mad as possible? So it's a tough thing for these series to deal with, because at the end of the day, someone's going to be upset at the call or at the decision or at the rule or whatever it may be. So it's tough for these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't envy the series at all, because no matter what you do, someone's going to get mad. If you take away pushbacks, people are going to be all like, they're all just punny people. I've seen so many people over the years get mad about pushbacks and about getting a pushback penalty. And some of them are valid. Some of them I think are just excuses for overdriving. And I'm of the opinion, if you get like 5 pushbacks in a weekend, it's probably on you, because it's not that hard to avoid. At that point, that sounds more like a you issue. But at the same time, there are times when you simply can't avoid it. And if the series isn't allowing protest, or you don't have a camera on, or you don't have the camera at the right angle, or you simply don't have the understanding to go to the race director and get it overturned, or don't want to sit in line for an hour to protest a P12 finish, then it's understandable why you would not be happy about the pushback system and not want to have to deal with all of that every single weekend. So I am hoping that we see some kind of change in the next year or so to really kind of get the penalty system overruled, so that we can at least have some kind of consistency and some system that doesn't seem arbitrary. And that's the biggest thing for me that I'm going to wrap up the segment with, is we need a penalty system that we can look at, that we can look back at and understand why every call was made. And as it is, I looked at the data from Trackhouse, 74 penalties. You don't know what the story was behind each and every one of them. The race directors 100% don't know, because they just can't have that many eyes on it. And until that's the case, until we're assessing penalties all in mass off of things that we don't know about, I think that it's impossible to really get a good grasp on it. So hopefully we can work together. We can find a solution. I'm excited to hear some suggestions. If anyone has them, I mean, I'm all ears. Alex, David, I mean, we're all ears to hear some of those over the course of the next few weeks. But certainly hate to see it for Frankie Mossman, but I mean, still a good show for him, and still a good show from everyone that ran the Rotax Winter Trophy. And hey, still congrats to Diego Ramos, even with the penalty. I mean, still outstanding for him to get the grand finals ticket and send himself off with that one. So We're going to send ourselves to a break here, but when we come back, it's time to talk about the next round of the SKUSA Winter Series, the final rounds as we get set to go back to Miami for some more racing. But first, a word from our partners.
Brandon, why are there all these charges for just over $200 from Acceleration Kart Racing's website?
That's because AKR gives you free shipping on orders of $200 or more within the continental US.
Okay, but I thought you were just getting a pair of gloves. That's what, $70?
But if I'm getting a new pair of gloves, I might as well get a new pair of shoes to match. And then on top of that, I'll get a neck brace because with the shipping, it's basically free.
Yeah, I do not think the math checks out on that.
Everything you need, all in one place and shipped to your door for free for orders of $200 or more. Exclusions apply. Spend responsibly. Shop AKR.com.
It's back. The beanie's back.
Had to do it.
A week to go.
Shout out to Caleb Biesca on that one. I mean, hey, we're less than 7 days away from Super Bowl Sunday, 5 days from now. Once we wrap up in Miami, I'm going to be watching my Chiefs hopefully win a Super Bowl. We're going to be celebrating the legacy of Patrick Mahomes. And, I mean, Caleb, again, where are your Texans right now? So
I'm here. I'm here.
Anyways, before the Super Bowl happens on Sunday, though, we're going to be crowning some champions for the SKUSA Winter Series, the first national series of the year. And, I mean, I'm excited to see this one. We've had a close points battle on the X30 side of things. And Alessandro DiTullio, let's start with him as we get set to go for rounds 3 and 4. I mean, dominant in round 2 on Sunday in the first weekend in Miami. Round 1, he was able to come away with a second. He was in the top 3 pretty much every single session that weekend. And Alex, I mean, you predicted him to win coming into the weekend. You saw him practice and race really well on the local side of things at the SSKC round. You saw him be really fast on test weekend. How are you thinking he's going to translate here as he gets up to go on the reverse layout with potential Winter Series championship in mind here?
I think more of the same, right? I mean, it's a local kid who is very fast everywhere, and he's only getting better, right? And the Kart public's getting better. The Inter-MS guys are getting better as a team, and so it's a scary team to if you are the competitors to see them kind of really grow into this, this powerhouse, right? I mean, not only is now we got Trinity as the KR, official team. Inter-MS has shown entered this conversation of another big Kart public team, especially with DiTullio heading the way. And yeah, I mean, he has one of the most laps around this play, especially on the reverse layout, which is a little bit less common than the normal layout. He's for sure one of the guys to watch in this one. I mean, he was ultra impressive, right? He almost swept the whole weekend in both classes. Penalty in the KA side of things, DQ, should I say. But I mean, to pretty much have a first, second before penalties is crazy in a senior class over the course of a weekend. So he was impressive. I think there's a few other guys that I'm looking at in this weekend and saying they could really make a mark. And I'll get into that a little bit later in this segment. But David, I want to hear from you because you predicted Norberg, I predicted ADT. We traded off wins there. I mean, how impressed were you with ADT to start the year off as hot as he did?
Extremely. He made me worried that you were right the whole weekend. I was lucky to get Norberg in the first race, but I'll tell you, ADT I think I said it in one of the post-race interviews. It's like the old commercials. ADT is always there. I feel like we're going to see him a lot this year, and in particular, I think we're going to see him a lot this weekend. I mean, we saw him in KA100 and X30. I mean, just be absolutely on the ball, so quick, always running up front, always on the top of the time charts. I mean, it didn't matter. He came out of the slow group and got a pole in KA, I'm pretty sure. I mean, his weekend was so ridiculously impressive that I just kind of have to expect that he's going to do it again. And frankly, compete for that championship, if we're being totally honest here. So from my perspective, I think ADT is absolutely going to be up there. And to your point, I think the Kart Republics have really impressed me. I mean, we obviously know what they were able to do with Joe Turney behind the wheel last year, but just being able to see two teams come out of the box and be super quick in both of the pro classes and really up and down the grid, regardless of the classes we're talking about. The Kart Republics have been extremely impressive to me as well. I think, frankly, it's Kart Republic versus RPG if we're looking at it from a team perspective in the pro categories coming into this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few teams to look out for, right? Car Public, RPG, they're two of the powerhouses. We can't forget Speed Concepts, right? Because the Tony Kart guys over there, OTK, with Garrison coming off a big win, Mossman coming off of a win before the penalty, right? That SCR Red Speed looks quick, and the confidence is brewing with these guys. So, so Garrison's gonna be leading the way this weekend, but for me, one of the guys that I want to mention and a sleeper to win the championship. I mean, he needs a few things to go his way. Is one of the Car Public guys for Trinity, Brandon Carr. He finally had some rain go his way. He was waiting for rain all year last year. Didn't really get any rain. Got it in the first weekend of the year. And I mean, if it wasn't for a little bit of a missed setup, he told me, he would have probably won that race. The Tulio was able to win it, but Brandon Carr was super fast. And he comes into this weekend, I believe, sitting 9th in the championship. But with the one drop in play, he can drop his round 1 performance if he has 2 solid races this weekend in rounds 3 and 4. So Brandon Carr is going to be he's going to be one of the guys to watch as probably an aggressor, because he knows he has a chance at this one if he plays his cards right. Obviously, the Tulio goes into this one with a big advantage, right? A first and a second next 30. So he's going to go out there and just probably try to do the same thing, but you're going to see him not back down what we normally see from Tulio, because he's usually, one of the more aggressive drivers, but he's going to play things a little bit more smart than a guy like Brandon Carr, who has it all to play for. Obviously Ryan Norberg, right, coming to this one with a first and a fourth, I believe, from last month. So he's about 60 points back. He's sitting in second place. And then there's other guys, right? Like Garrison's in the mix. This is going to be a good championship battle. I think the point spread is larger than what it's going to be because we haven't taken into account the drop yet. And a lot of people had a good, round 1, bad round 2, or vice versa. And so this weekend is where all of a sudden you can see a sleeper come out there and win. And Brandon Carr is one of the guys to look out for this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Carr, first weekend on a new kart, last time out in Miami, and round 1 did not go to plan at all. But round 2, like you mentioned, with the rain that you've been waiting for, was able to put it in P2 and really was in the top 3 all afternoon with that situation. I'm a little bit hesitant to put him all the way up in the contenders mix, knowing the struggles that they had in the dry. But at the same time, I mean, we've seen Brandon run up front at a variety of different tracks last year. We know Trinity is capable of setting up a kart really well. But along those lines, one guy that had a really good weekend last time out that, again, was maybe a surprise to some, not to any of the 305 contingent, any of the guys that have seen him race in Homestead, Jacob Kolar, man. I mean, in the rain, he was really good once he got in a rhythm on Sunday. On Saturday, he drove himself onto a pole position, and then in the final, all the way back into contention for a race podium before a collision with Garrison. I mean, Kolar's another one that is kind of a little ways out from the championship battle, but with a couple solid rounds could find himself easily in contention. And if you're talking about the first 2 races he's done this year between Rock Cup or the Florida Winter Tour and the Winter Series that we saw in Miami, I mean, he looks like he's taken a step forward. And yes, it's his home track. Yes, he's had a lot of laps around there. But, I mean, Alex, what we saw from Jacob Kolar in that first race was pretty special.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this from Jacob. Whenever we come to Homestead, he's quick, but not as quick as what we saw last month. Right, got his first big national podium there, and honestly was in contention for a win, especially in round 1, where he had a chance to go out there. I mean, he was putting purple lap after purple lap. If he didn't have to start so far back in the in the final because he got kind of bullied around a little bit in the pre-final. I think he could have won that race. I think Ryan kind of backed it down towards the end of that one, but Kolar was fast. And he's going to be one to look out for. I think the biggest thing that Jacob's going to take away from last month and hopefully apply to his driving this week is going to be some aggression, because these guys kind of used him up a little bit last race, right? They knew he was fast, but they also know that he's kind of one of the new kids in the block, right, in his sophomore season now. And they can kind of, use him a little bit, right? Use the bumper, side pot him out the way, and he'll give it to you. And for Jacob's sake, it's just not how these guys race, right? Whether you like it or not, you got to go out there and you got to race their race. And their race is going to be aggressive, on the limit, sometimes over the limit style driving. And so for Jacob to go out there and win, which I think is the cards, it's possible, he's going to have to step up his level of aggression. And if he does that, there is no question that he has the pace to go on pole. The question is, can he sustain it? Can he, because he was on pole last month, and by lap 3 he was down in 11th, I believe it was. So if he can get pole, or in the front somewhere, and keep himself there throughout that pre-final, come final time, he's going to be one of the guys to watch in that final. But it just goes to show why we come back to this track every single year, right? This Homestead track races so well, and it brings a lot of drivers into play. Not that because Jacob is quick, and like you said, I expect this hopefully for him throughout the season. He's one of those guys, kind of reminds me of what we see kind of from Isambard, right? Homestead local, who is quick at other racetracks when given the opportunity to go out there and drive. So I'm hoping to see that step up from Kolar. We saw it last month, and I think we're going to continue to see him make that stride into an elite level senior driver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kolar's ability to race at an elite level in the first 2 rounds was impressive. We'll see how he does in these 2 rounds with a reverse track layout, another layout that he has a lot of laps on, but certainly one that we've seen more technical on the driving side of things, a little bit more spread out, I would say, on the racing side of things. If you compare at least the X30 races, the Ks still continue to be ultra jumbled up on this layout of Homestead. But David, I want to get your take on the 2 main Sodi Kart drivers as we get set to go for X30 Pro this weekend. And it was kind of a disappointing round 1 and 2 for Harley Keeble and Dalton Haynes. They had a lot of pace on Friday. The track, though, once it gripped up, seemed like it kind of went away from them a little bit. And then in the rain, it felt like both of them kind of missed the setup and maybe weren't quite as far up as we would have expected them to be. So, I mean, 2 young guys with a lot of aggression, a lot of talent, but where do you think they're looking at heading into this weekend, David?
Well, I think, like so many of us had with the Sodi Kart folks, I mean, we're on record on our podcast talking about our high expectations for them, and then we got to the Florida Winter Tour, and then all of a sudden it looked like they were going to meet our expectations. But like you mentioned, the track gripped up, and all of a sudden the Sodi Karts went bye-bye, which was a bit surprising, I thought, because the Keeble-Haynes duo, Keeble-Haynes 24, I mean, I looked at it and I said, here are 2 young, aggressive drivers who are going to push each other really, really hard. And, they've proven that they can run up front. They've proven that they can beat the best. I mean, Dalton did that at GoPro, right? So I think that the expectation for them is just to improve at this point. It's clear to me, especially, again, knock on wood, looks like it's going to be dry. So we got to be expecting that track grip's only going to increase throughout the weekend, right? So by the time we get to Sunday night, they're going to have to find something that they didn't have on weekend 1. But that being said, they don't lack in driver talent. They certainly don't lack in dollars. They don't lack in factory support. That's not the issue. It's just putting together that combination. Like you said, they might have just missed it in the rain, right? So that's a team that I'm keeping an eye on just to see the improvement, frankly, because I think it's coming. It's got to be.
Yeah. And Alex, I mean, we've talked a lot about some of the guys that had really good round 1s. Now we've talked about 2 of the guys that struggled a bit on the first couple rounds of the season. But I mean, how about some more guys that maybe flew under the radar? And I mean, we saw a couple guys first off that came to mind on my side of things, Donovan Bonilla, we saw him on round 1, won the pre-final, and then the rest of the weekend was kind of just invisible. Diego Ramos, we talked about him as well, had the really good weekend or 2 weekends in Orlando, not so good in Homestead round 1 and 2. And then guys like Nick Terlecki that we saw at the end of last year put together a lot of good results and good pace in the X30 Pro side of things. Not quite the rounds 1 and 2 that he would have been looking for, got turned around on the second race. So, I mean, Alex, are there some more sleepers that you're kind of looking at before we start to head into the predictions on the X30 side of things?
Yeah, and this is a little bit of a sneak peek to one of my guys that I have up there in the front, Austin Garrison. I mean, we talked about him at Orlando. He was quick last month. I mean, I believe he got a pole last month. Correct me if I'm wrong. He had a few, top 4 starts there. Got mustered around a little bit. Didn't have the race pace, but speed's there. And I think if they can figure that out, right, I expect him to be one of the guys up front. I mean, obviously, he got a win here at Homestead. It was kind of like the breakthrough win for him that led to a pretty solid year for him last year. I expect he's gonna be one of the guys to watch. I mean, you mentioned a bunch of guys. Bonilla, obviously one of the guys to watch. He won this race last year. Not on this layout, but he won this race last year. And yeah, there's a bunch of guys. I expect the Sodi guys to come back stronger. They're hoping for a slick racetrack. I mean, because they were rocket fast on Friday. I mean, to the tune of 0.2 over the field. And we were looking at each other like, wow, this is going to be a domination from the guys in orange and black. And then grip came through. Then happy hour happened. Then Saturday morning happened. All of a sudden, they're 0.4 off. And what happened? And then it got worse and worse. And the grip levels, rose. And then the rain came, missed the setup a little bit. It was a weekend that started off so hot for them and ended on such a low in both senior and shifter. That I think they came away from that weekend. They don't want that feeling again. They don't like that feeling. I expect a bounce back from them. I'm not going to say they're going to go out there and win. Certainly in the cards for those guys. I think that Keeble and Dalton are 2 top 10 finishers in this class. Both capable of winning whenever. But I think just from what I saw last month to this week, I think they're both going to be in the top 10. But I don't think they're going to be able to stick with the likes of Ryan, DeTulio, and a few others that we'll get into a little bit later.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw the first weekend that they had pace at different points, and we've seen a lot. The thing is, we've seen a lot of the guys that have had sort of situational pace, so to speak, whether it be the pre-final in the rain. We saw obviously Brandon Carr, but the first weekend, it was the story of Ryan Norberg, the story of Alessandro DeTulio, and then kind of the side stories of Austin Garrison and Jacob Kolar. And when we get set to go for predictions coming up next, I have to figure that it's going to be one of those 4 guys that you 2 are going to pick for a win. But we'll see what other bold predictions we have in store coming up next. But first, another word from our partners.
So you will finally want to get behind the wheel, huh?
Yeah, I've been shooting for 3 years and I've never got to drive.
Well, you're going to need some more gear than just your helmet. Why don't you go to shopakr.com. They got their inventory online and they'll ship it the same day if you order before 5:30 p.m. Eastern.
They got shoes?
Yep.
Gloves?
Yep.
Rip protectors?
Got those too.
Can they make me go fast?
No.
Here at Acceleration Kart Racing, we've got everything you need to get on track. What happens next? Well, that's on you. Check us out online at shopakr.com.
Welcome back here to Grid Talk, sponsored by shopakr.com. There you saw, again, their products there. You can see our wonderful Dolphins fan, Brandon, with seamless acting there. So shout out to him. I mean, I know, his team's been gone for a few weeks, but hey, he gets to watch the Super Bowl in Miami. So that's a positive. But back on track here again, we're set to go for the predictions. Not just for the Super Bowl, because we know the Chiefs are going to win that, but for the X30 side of things. Alex, I mean, last time you nailed a pick. I'll let you go first because he's leading the points, but what are you looking for, both in terms of who wins on Saturday and Sunday, as well as who wins the championship for the Winter Series?
It's so tough, right? Because to me, it's between DeTulio and Norberg. While Brandon Carr is in the mix, and there's other guys in the mix as well who can definitely, go under the radar, get a few seconds, maybe even win a few, and win the championship, right? Because the drop is in your favor. So there's a lot of guys sitting in that top 10 that quietly have a pretty big drop that can all of a sudden sneak into a win. But to me, it's between DeTulio and Norberg. I expect chaos. While this layout of track maybe creates field spread and it's a little more technical, and so some guys, if you got it down, you can pull away. It does race well, and it creates bottlenecks early on in the race because of some of the passing opportunities. It requires deep braking zones. It requires kind of a lunge, little side-to-side contact, and all of a sudden you have a 10-car train. So that's where chaos can emerge. And so it's kind of bad news for DeTulio, Norberg, who want probably a cleaner race than they're probably going to get. That being said, predictions. I think I'm not going to say rounds 3 or 4, but I think we're not going to have the same winner twice. I'm going to say DeTulio wins one, and Austin Garrison wins the other one, whichever order you want to do it. You know what? Just so we can have it on record, I'm going to say DeTulio wins round 3, Garrison wins rounds 4. And I think your champion is going to be DeTulio. It pains me to bet against Ryan Norberg. It's kind of like betting against Patrick Mahomes. You just can't do it. But it pains me. It pains me, but I think DeTulio is going to do it. Ryan was very quick last year on this layout, on both layouts, but on this layout, him and Turney were on another level compared to everybody else. So that does scare me going to this weekend, knowing how quick Ryan is. But I expect chaos, and that's why I think guys like DeTulio, Garrison, with a little bit more aggression in them, are gonna walk away a little bit happier than a few of the drivers this weekend. And I think they're gonna be able to emerge from the chaos and get a pair of wins.
So DeTulio wins one, Garrison wins the other. DeTulio wins the championship. Alexander Searle turning into the ultimate Alessandro DeTulio fan early on in the season. I can't really blame him because ADTs come out swinging. But David, the last time we were on the show doing predictions for round 1 and 2, we saw that you were able to come away with the correct prediction, the very first one of the year, hitting Ryan Norberg, winning the first race. Who do you got this time?
Ryan Norberg. Like, clearly, like it's I hate to do that because I really hate picking the same guys, and I hate making boring picks, right? I like to go out and swing for the fences, but I know too much, even in my limited amount of karting, to hear track's going to be gripped up, field spread. I hear Norberg is quick there already, and I saw what he did in the dry on the other layout already. So I don't see any reason not to pick Ryan Norberg for at least one of the wins this weekend. I think at least one of the two is going to be a total blowout, especially with the guys fighting behind him. All he's got to do is get out front and have one of the folks that we're used to. I won't name names, but there's a few guys who like to mix it up, like to make big passes. But when that happens, you typically see a driver run away, and typically it's a driver like Ryan Norberg. And so from my perspective, especially too, when we're talking about the championship, his drop, at least as we stand right now, is a 4. And, let's say he has a really good weekend and he's finishing in the top 3, both races. If you're dropping a 4th place in the points, chances are you're going to win the championship. So I would say Norberg will win probably, let's say, I'm going to go say race 1. Norberg wins race 1. He wins the championship. And I do actually agree with Alex, and I hate to do it, but I think Garrison wins race 2.
All right, so Norberg with the win in the championship. Again, you have to say, I mean, he's looked really good so far in the first 2 rounds of the season. I mean, first off, his best race in the rain that we've seen in a long time from him. Even though it came with a fourth place finish, the pace was there. That was impressive. And obviously in the dry, he picked up the win on Saturday. So Norberg, if he wins the Winter Series, it'll kind of, in some ways, rewrite the book a little bit from last year, where he started off on the wrong foot for the first time. It seemed like the first cracks in the armor were emerging after what was a dominant 2022 season. And before I give my predictions, first off, I've been getting my wrist lit up from WhatsApp notifications. So I'd like to say the Miami Dolphins still had a really good season this year. And, you know,
and they'll be watching the Super Bowl like the rest of us. It'll be great.
Yeah. And as you know, as much as I've been correct in a lot of my playoff predictions on the NFL side of things, I was the only one to not predict a winner in round 1 and 2 on my predictions. So I do get a lot of things wrong. With that being said, I came into this weekend and I have not been more confident about Austin Garrison having a win in quite some time. And it hurts me that you guys picked him, because now I look like I'm just following the lead of everyone else. But I have no doubt in my mind that Austin Garrison's going to be at the front of the field. I think this is a track that suits a more technical driver. Garrison on technical tracks excels. We've seen last year was, in my opinion, his most impressive drive of the season came at Homestead, where he was able to beat Turney and Norberg on merit. We saw good pace from him out of rounds 1 and 2, as well as in Orlando. And I really think that this weekend is where you see Austin Garrison get at least one race win. I'm going to say that happens in round number 3. I think other guys to contend for the box. I think DeTulio and Norberg both are going to be up there, but I'm going to do one of them. I'm going to pick DeTulio's going to get on the podium on round number 3, and I'll go a little bit out of the box and pick Diego Ramos to get on the podium as well in that race. Round 4, though, and this could be either race. Again, this is me being very specific. One of these races is going to be a mess, because this track, as much as it lends itself to more technical driving, it also, like Alex has mentioned on multiple occasions, lends itself to more sending zones. And when you think of sending, David, you were really politically correct with what you were saying. I'm just going to skip straight to it. I think this is a race that Harley Keeble and Dalton Haynes are tailor-made to have at least one good race. And so, you know what? I'll put my stake on the Soda USA, the PK Sport boys. I'll say they get 2 guys on the podium, and the third guy on the podium takes home the championship trophy, and that's Alessandro DeTulio. And I think Norberg has a good weekend pace-wise, but we saw last year this layout favored Turney and Garrison compared to him just a little bit more. And I think this year, with how close the field has been in the early rounds and how much I think that this style of racing that we've seen from the Sodi boys and from DeTulio, I think I'm not going to bet against ADT's form so far this season. I think he gets the job done. I think Keeble in particular gets one up on the field and kind of makes up for what's been not a bad start to the season, but maybe not quite what he would have anticipated. So round 3 goes to Garrison and a really smooth display of driving. Round 4 goes to Keeble, and hopefully I get at least one right this time, because rounds 1 and 2 was not the greatest start to the season for me, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it started off good for you though. You picked Dono, you got a pre-final win, and that was as good as it got for you. I think I like your picks. Exactly. There we go. A little consolation prize. No, I like your picks. I think I like that we have a little bit of disparity in the group, right? I mean, we're putting pressure here on a few guys, right? ADT and Garrison, we all kind of agree they're going to be the guys to watch. I mean, I'm a little intrigued. No one picked, especially you, Emory, because you brought it up. I was thinking you're going to go out there and swing for like a Jacob Kolar, because he was quick. And again, if there's any driver who has more laps than the other guy, it's probably Kolar. It's him, Ryan, and Garrison and DeTulio, probably the most laps from this place. But it might go to Kolar just because he's there more often than everybody else. And especially on this reverse layout, he knows a few tips, a few tricks. And I suspect that he learned from last week or last month. So he's a guy to watch. There's a bunch of guys to watch in this class, right? Brandon Carr is another one to where, while the radar may say no rain, it's Florida, right? We could wake up with no rain. It's pouring. So he's one of those guys where you can't ever. I'm hoping for rain. I'm going to say it right now. I'm hoping for rain.
Oh,
Let's have some fun. That was one of the best. That was one of the coolest shifter races ever. All right.
all right. You're
So,
tearing
we
everything
need some more
down.
rain.
I was gonna say the racing was amazing. The teardown, not so much. I mean, come on, Alex. I love me some rain. I love it a lot more when I'm racing, and I don't have to worry about the logistical side of it. But hey, this weekend, no rain. If it happens some later this season, I don't really care. But I'm going against you on that one. But you did mention the shifter race, and that's a perfect segue into our predictions for this round shifter. A slightly lighter field in the pro shifter category this weekend. We still see a lot of the main protagonists: Danny Formal, Alan Isambard, Mateus Morgado, Cooper Becklin from the first round. We see Giorgio Carrara coming back into the fray this season for the first time with the Inter MS boys. So we'll see him we'll see him up there. We've got Michael Riccio as well coming back. Henry Wheeler, after a disappointing round 1 and 2, moves over to the shifter side of things. Alex, what are you expecting from shifter heading into this weekend?
More chaos. I mean, more chaos for sure. As much as easy as it is to go out there and say Formal's going to go out there and walk them, I think my prediction last month of Mateus Morgado, while it didn't come true, there was a world where it did, and I think this is the weekend that it happens. I think he sneaks one out, and that's me being a little bit hopeful, or at least like bold, should I say? Because Danny's the clear-cut favorite. I don't want to say clear-cut because Isambard is fast, and he's going to give him trouble. But it seemed like while Isambard had that one-lap pace where he was just an absolute rocket ship, when push comes to shove and you need a guy to go out there and put 20 consistent laps together as fast as humanly possible on a mano-a-mano fight, there's not many guys I'm taking over Danny Formal in a kart race, maybe anybody. And so it's so hard to pick against them. Alan Isambard's another good pick, right? He's one of the favorites, if not maybe the favorite, right? Hometown kid, a lot of laps here, right? A few things didn't go his way last month, and it cost him a win. One of them just being Danny doing the crossover twice on him at the start. And then from there, just getting shuffled back with Bailiff and Morgado, and then we all know what happened between those drivers. There's a lot that we can look at, right? I mean, Cooper Becklin was fast last month as well, so he's another guy quick on that RPG package, has one of the best shifter drivers, if not the driver right now in the country, as his teammate. So I think there's a lot of storylines, even though it's not a big class. Storylines are huge in this one. As for my prediction, I kind of already said it. I think Morgado sneaks one here. I think Morgado gets one. I think Danny gets the other one. I'll give Danny round 3, Morgado round 4. I think round 4 we get some sort of drama, some controversy. Morgado sneaks through and wins. I think Isambard podiums twice. But I think, I haven't even mentioned him really, but Gavin Bailiff, right? Another strong contender in the class. He was quick last year in shifter, was getting his bearings throughout the year. But I mean, to really put your foot down on this class against a world champion Morgado, and I mean a ultra talented driver in Danny Formal who can do just about anything, and to be on pace with them, right? It shows how good he is, how good the kart public is. And I'm excited to see how this plays out.
Yeah, certainly, Alex. And I mean, we saw the Bailiff versus Isambard battle in that last round. We saw Mateus show a lot of good pace. It's definitely something that maybe it took him a little bit to get accustomed to. We saw certainly on the rock side of things, he finally found himself up at the front of the field consistently. But rounds 1 and 2 were not quite what he expected. But I mean, David, we saw Danny first rounds put on an absolute clinic. It's going to take a lot to beat Danny Formal. I want to know, first off, what do you think could bring him down this weekend? And second off, do you think it will happen?
Well, I mean, when Alex was talking, I was just thinking to myself, I really, really, really want to pick Isambard. Because I was so freaking impressed by him. Because he did such a great job. He showed incredible pace. He really put a number down a couple of times in qualifying where you're just like, holy smokes, where did that lap come from? And he did go toe-to-toe with Danny at times during the racing. But he ruffled too many feathers. And I think, unfortunately, the Piper's going to get paid. I mean, even if he's fast, I just have a feeling someone's going to send him. Or just he's going to get raced rough. And, as we've seen in karting, if someone races you hard, it gives an opportunity for a driver like Danny Formal to just run away. And so, Danny's so good. And this is the thing. Alex has mentioned that a few times to me, and it's amazing to watch. But Danny is so aggressive on those curbs at Homestead. And this being a more curb-heavy layout of Homestead, even more so than going the correct direction around Homestead. Just picking against Danny, I just can't do it. I think he's going to sweep the weekend. I think he wins the championship easily. I hate to be boring about it because I'd love to just tell you that Isambard's going to sweep or something different's going to happen. But I'll make this prediction. I think that Morgado will finish third in both races. We'll just see what happens with that one.
Interesting. You know what? I'm going to go bold straight away. I think Isambard wins both races.
Wow. There it is.
Okay, so if we look at round one, before the rain came in on Saturday, like the full day on Saturday, Isambard was 3/10 clear of the field in qualifying, right? His dry pace was there with Danny. The reverse layout of Homestead is a track that, in theory, you have a little bit more offset when it comes to experience that should favor Isambard. Now, we didn't get to see round two of him versus AJ last year because Isambard had a rib injury that took him out of contention. So I'm working a little bit blind in the most recent comparison, but I trust Alan Isambard to have that pace. The second question with him is, can he keep his composure? Can the racecraft follow suit? And, last round, I felt like it was a little bit hit or miss. We saw him kind of lose his cool a little bit. And I think that he'll have kind of a rebound in that sense in this race, knowing that he has the chance to really kind of set expectations high and continue the pace-wise that he had the last race. And he has a golden opportunity to come away with at least 2 national podiums, if not 2 wins. Now, having said that, Danny is extremely good, and he is going to make Isambard work for it. But I think this is one of those races that for Isambard, he needs it. After what we've seen in the last year or so, where he started the season off, looked so promising against AJ, got hurt, missed a lot of racing, came back. He was fast when he had the chance to be fast and had the chance to run outside of Homestead. Comes back this past round, had a lot of potential and had a lot of pace all through Friday and into Saturday and just couldn't capitalize. I think he's got the motivation. He's got the experience. I think he finds a way to get it done both days. Giorgio Carrara, I think, is going to be the third guy on the podium. I actually think Mateus is going to barely miss out. I think he ends up fourth both days. I think he'll be close. But Giorgio, if you look at how he ended last season pace-wise in both races in Vegas, Giorgio Carrara was up there consistently. It took him a little bit of time to get acclimated to the Kart Republic, but once he kind of got things sorted out at the end of the Rock Vegas weekend and headed into Supernats, he was extremely quick. I think that carries over this year. I think he finds himself on third on the box both days. I mean, I expect him, I expect Mateus, I expect Cooper Becklin to all be contenders for the podium. But Isambard sweeps both races. I do think Danny still holds on to win the championship by virtue of being consistently right there in second and probably challenging for pre-final and qualifying wins. I just think Isambard finds that last little bit of magic to pull it off at the end.
It's interesting. I mean, I can't argue with it, right? It's the hometown kid probably got the most laps around here in a shifter, especially on this layout. So I like it. I like Danny going out there and winning it. I think to me the most likely thing is what Dave said, right? A sweep there for Danny. but it wouldn't shock me if Isambard takes one, maybe even sweeps both. But we got to remember, right? With the Sodis, we saw it a little bit more exaggerated on the single speed stuff, but when the track grips up, the Sodi just it starts to lose a little bit of pace. And that's something that we saw at the X30, and I think it showed itself a little bit in the shifter side of things. I think Alan just got caught up a little bit with some guys battling. We all know what happened. And like you said, Emory, as well, the composure thing, right? That's gonna be big. If he can keep himself patient and bide his time, knowing that he's quick, that's gonna be the key. Because I think for Mal, even though Alan had him, especially in that round one, Alan had him right where he wanted him, and Danny got the crossover both times, pre-final and final. It's one of those things where it's gonna come on the racecraft, and it was the one, I don't want to say question mark going into this year, right? But now with Alan kind of doing a bigger season than we've seen from him, he doesn't get to race against these guys as often, and so now it's one of the things that he's learning, right? Not that he doesn't have the racecraft, but like the experience that Danny has behind the wheel of a shifter, the laps that he has with these competitors. So I think Alan's gonna learn from that, and I don't think he'll get crossover again, but I still think Danny is gonna be the guy. I think there's a few other guys you haven't mentioned, right? Because Michael Riccio is pretty quick. Saraceno was quick. Saraceno was a sleeper pick, right? The pace was quick on Friday, not as quick on Saturday, not as quick on Sunday. But Saraceno's a guy that I could see getting a podium. I could see it. I could see him sneaking a podium, right? Especially if some chaos happens. I mean, there's a few guys in this mix where there's no guarantee that this is not as black or white as we saw last month, right? Now we have Formal, Carrara joining the mix, right? Riccio, Becklin, Formal, Isambard, Morgado, Saraceno. There's so many guys that are capable of a podium around this place, that I'm intrigued to see what happens. But I still think Danny's gonna be the guy. I think Danny gets the championship. That being said, this is gonna be a good shifter race.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm intrigued to see how it plays out. I think if nothing else, if we don't have any massive incidents, we're gonna see some good fighting between Isambard, between Danny, and hopefully between the rest of the field. I'm excited to see how Morgado continues to do as he continues to get acclimated to the shifter on the US side of things. I think as a whole, we're set up for some exciting shifter racing. And Alex, I'm going to go to David first. David, I mean, we saw the last time out with the shifter side, we saw some real intense battles between Gavin Bailiff and Alan Isambard, and we really saw kind of the back and forth, not just with them, but with Mateus, with Danny, and with Vincenzo as well. And as we're getting set to go again, it's a kind of similar dynamic with the field where it's not a heavy field, but there's still kind of good quality in it. What are your expectations when it comes to the racecraft side of things on the shifter category?
Well, you only need two to have a good race. Field size doesn't necessarily mean quality, right? A big field size can just be a bunch of guys who don't know how to race, and that's certainly not the case in shifter, right? I mean, you've got 5 or 6 guys up there who can mix it up. We had some surprises. I think there were some expectations. I didn't think, going into the shifter weekend last time, that we thought it was going to be nearly as competitive as it was. And I kind of feel like at least I gave the impression that I'm kind of expecting it to be predictable, right? Which probably means it's going to be unpredictable. I don't think we're going to see the same type of weather conditions that really helped a little bit, especially in that second race with the racing. It's going to be a little bit more straightforward of a weekend, I think we're looking at. But that being said, shifter racing, I've fallen in love with it because every time we think it's going to be boring, it knocks our expectations into the next century. I mean, I've really enjoyed shifter racing, and I think it's going to deliver again. I really do, because there's so much talent there at the front. There's a little bit of beef, which always helps racing, and everyone's got something to shoot for, right? If Danny loses, it's a storyline. If Danny sweeps the weekend, it's a storyline. So from my perspective as a broadcaster, I can't wait.
Absolutely. And Alex, I mean, we've seen some incredible shifter racing over the last couple of years. We've seen some fights as recently as the last weekend out. I mean, as you get set to go for this weekend with a track that, I mean, you've seen a lot of racing at, what are you expecting when it comes to the racecraft in the field?
Well, hopefully some rain.
No!
But other than that, this track, we mentioned it with the single speed stuff, more the same in the shifter class, right? It's tough to pass, but if you're a guy that likes to send it, and it's kind of why I picked Danny, right? Curb monster, send monster, last of the late breakers. It's always Danny. You can't bet against the guy that's going to outbreak you at a track that you need to outbreak somebody. So that's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting more chaos. I still think, I mean, I know the weather helped a little bit in rounds 2. Whether or not, that was kind of good actually. But bad weather or good weather, I think it's going to be more argy-bargy, more on the limit, maybe over the limit racing with Formal, probably Formal v Isambard part 105. And I think Formal, comes away with this one, but I expect hard racing, like I mentioned, especially in the 2 hairpins where you have to send it up the inside. We're gonna see some late lunges from probably 3 zip codes away. So it's gonna be fun to watch.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen some good shifter racing the first round of the season. We ended on a high note with Supernats and with Rock Vegas last year. Lots of good shifter racing, lots of good racing in general as of late. I mean, between the Rotax series blowing everyone out of or blowing the expectations out of the water this season. Great job from Diego Ramos, Frankie Mossman as well. With the on-track title, Ramos gets the grand finals ticket at the end of the day. We saw our predictions for the X30 Pro side of things. Alex and I went with Alessandro Tullio to win the championship. David going with his man, Ryan Norberg. I mean, David, at this point, you're kind of an RPG fan. I mean, you picked Danny.
Don't say that.
You picked Danny to win both races. You picked Norberg to win the championship, Norberg to win round 3, Norberg to win round 1. I mean, come on, man. We need some variety here.
You're saying things like that. It's gonna make Drayton buy me a Norberg hat. I'm gonna have to pledge my allegiance to Norberg Nation. I mean, they gotta stop going so fast. I'll stop picking them. Last year I wouldn't have picked Norberg. It's just to turn it over a new Joe Turney. I'll tell you what, Joe Turney comes back, I'll start picking him. There you go. How about that?
All right. Any other thoughts as we get set to go, David, before we get set for this last weekend of the Winter Series?
I sure do. No rain, go 49ers.
No. All right, Alex. Obviously, fun weekends last time out. We saw you get the DeTullio prediction right. We saw you were almost on a Morgado. You had some good merit behind that, but as we get set for this weekend, again, you know that track better than anyone else on this podcast right now. Any last thoughts as we get set for this weekend?
Rain is probably going to come, and Patrick Mahomes is inevitable.
Oh, no.
See, I like
He's a Swiftie. He's a Swiftie confirmed.
See, I like one part of this message a lot better than the other part. I personally hope for no rain because, look, we got our rain fix in round 1. I hope it happens at some point later on in the season. I can confirm from inside sources that Alexander Searle is not a Swiftie. I have exclusive argumentative proof of that between other members of the KC crew that Alex is not a Swiftie. So we're going to dispel that narrative right here and there. But
that's not what the private chat is saying, by the way.
That's what I'm saying. I've got enough experience on this front to know that he's completely right about Patrick Mahomes being the GOAT. Hopefully wrong about the rain. Hopefully wrong about the rain. Hopefully right about his thoughts on Mahomes. And we'll see about the actual racing predictions. But in the meantime, this has been another episode of Kart Chaser Grid Talk. We've seen myself become an enemy for different Miami natives. So, I mean, I came into this episode with no enemies at the track that I know of, and now I think I'm going to have to watch for my head on this weekend. But The good news is I'm not out on pit lane, so it's a bit harder to find me than you guys. I'll be back on the broadcast side of things. If you if you want to find Alex and David, you know where to find them. They'll be on the pit lane all weekend long. You'll have to do a little bit of extra work to find me. In the meantime, though, go Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes is the GOAT. UNC beat Duke this weekend. That was really good. We'll be in Miami all weekend long, providing live coverage from the track. The final rounds of the SKUSA Winter Series getting set to go. This has been another great episode of KC Grid Talk, sponsored by Acceleration Kart Racing. You can check out all their products on shopakr.com. And we'll see you guys next week. Hopefully I don't make any more enemies.